It was a decade marked by pride, progress, and optimism.
The 90s was, let's get down to some business. We wanted to be world class.
A time of celebration.
Deep stuff, really deep.
I'm leaving the 80s behind and I'm coming into a new glittering stage in the world.
An era when local talents stole the spotlight.
We have to create something authentic, something that belongs to us.
I think most importantly, the 90s is about where, as a nation, we grew up.
This is how Singaporeans remember Singapore in the 1990s.
I'm going to tell you a story. Sit!
In the 90s, Singapore was transforming. The gears of its economy were shifting. From manufacturing to a new economy based on knowledge. And everywhere, everything seemed exciting and new.
Hey, look, boy, I want you to see.
I'm the best in Singapore and JB and Batam.
Always looks great on stage and off.
Wow, this is fun.
I enjoy dressing up.
Fashion unlimited, most stylish local personality. Wow!
The Asian man of the 90s.
Was that me?
That's what Najib Ali was once known as.
Oh my God, it's Najib Ali.
Najib Ali, a TV host, actor, and singer, was very aware of the changes Singapore was going through. Najib was at the heart of it all.
I really miss the 90s because if you look at all my clothes, I still love wearing those clothes. Only that because now that I can't because, I'm already 50 years old. So I think Singapore is going through a very exciting time. That was a time where I was exploring, I was experimenting, I was establishing, and I also, the most important thing, I was traveling a lot.
Globalization was the word du jour of the 90s. A bold new era, accompanied by a new and equally bold look and outlook.
The 90s seemed to be like a sense of growth, and I'm coming into a new glittering stage in the world.
As a Singaporean, I think our sensibilities is very Western because of our education and things like that. But I realized that my sensitivity as an Asian is very deep-rooted. I'm not embarrassed by that. And I begin to realize that in a way that how these Western sensibilities and Eastern sensibilities, when they collided, something wonderful is coming out.
Scenes of those cultural collisions happened often, especially when lifestyles and businesses were transforming.
It was an exciting time because there was an influx of these new ideas and new cultures, and we don't know how to react and what to do with it. But we are experiencing it and we're experimenting it in Singapore as well. And we were also opening up to the world.
And as Singapore became more visible to the world, a 21-year-old American arrived. That's me, Mike Kasem, in my first real job.
About, the Western Christian feast of All Hallows Day for me. When I first came to Singapore, let's put it this way, I brought my snowboard.
because I thought, hey, we're in Asia, for sure there's gonna be snow out there. I had no idea what I was getting into. Let's be honest, Singapore is Asia light. It's Asia for beginners. It wasn't a big culture shock for me, but a culture awareness that was really cool.
And being cool was very welcomed, especially among Singaporeans who've had enough of being called staid and straight-laced, or all work and little play. In the 90s, the Lion City tried loosening up.
Like we always say in the 90s, it's so happening. The music was so happening.
In the 90s. Oh man, the party scene was just so good. It was awesome. I guess from Wednesday onwards, you would be partying nonstop.
And you're gonna have somebody holding somebody's hair as they're throwing up over here, you know? It was just all part of it. We enjoyed it.
One venue was the star of the Singaporean party scene.
Zouk was like the pinnacle of the party scene. When they came out, they were like the diamond. It was like, that's the place to be seen, that's the place to go.
Zouk wasn't just a club. It was actually an institution. And I, Najib Ali, was actually spotted by the Fuji group who did Asia Bagus right there in Zouk.
Zouk upped the ante in the local and regional nightclub scene. For many, especially the young and young at heart, clubbing at Zouk became a rite of passage of sorts.
I think it's a major sign of progress, a major sign of modernization. Also, a lot of people, the mindset about Singapore has changed a lot. Maybe it's partly because of Zouk.
It was definitely a place to also feel like I can be accepted for who I am, no matter my gender, my lifestyle, my love of fashion. That was inclusion and freedom to be who you were.
As the live scene buzzed, entertainment on the tube played catch-up. MTV arrived late to Asia in 1991, 10 years after its debut in America. Round-the-clock music videos quickly changed how people consumed music and made unlikely celebrities of its presenters.
Welcome back to MTV Screen. We're going through the alphabet.
I was a superstar overseas. I mean, to the point where I was in a mall once in the Philippines. All of a sudden, somebody recognizes me in the store. Within 2 minutes, they had to shut the doors of the store, lock them, and they had to shut them so fast because people came running over that they locked some people inside with me. And the next thing you know, I look outside, I couldn't believe it. The first level, second level, and third level of the mall were just crowded with people all staring down into this store. And these 3 girls that were in the store started crying when they were looking at me. They started crying.
But in the early 90s, when Singapore was a land without MTV,
nobody knows who I am. So the recognition started when Singapore got cable and started taking shows like MTV. And then it was instantaneous. It got so big, so fast.
It's hip, it's snazzy, it's MTV.
MTV embodied being hip and trendy. It became an instant hit, especially amongst Singaporean youth, who were craving to catch the latest fashion and music trends from around the world.
Before, there'd be parts of the world where maybe they weren't up on fashion because they didn't really know what was going on. No way to see what their favorite rock stars were wearing, dressing like. Now, YouTube has made that all a level playing field. So I think MTV was that back then. The Singapore, where are they going to get their influence from?
Cable TV opened Singaporeans to influences from across the globe. It also helped push an exciting new era of growth and maturity of local television.
You must go shopping to feel better. And when you feel better, you want to shop some more, right?
When cable TV came out, Night Rage came out as well because MTV Asia, we got to compete with that, right? So our own local show.
Night Rage!
And that was where growing up was parallel, I believe, with Under One Roof at the time.
Vernetta Lopez, Under One Roof. So happy day.
Wow, I was there too, huh? Sitcom, MTV shows, wow. I feel old.
In the 90s, Singapore had evolved into a bustling cosmopolis. And the styles and sensibilities of East and West seemed to be quickly merging in different forms. Cable TV was one of those forms. It was a hit.
Get this! MTV are giving stuff away.
But the country's sole national broadcaster didn't take the competition sitting down. They raised their game.
There was the push to create more local content as a sort of a counter to all this influx of foreign content. They would want some content that they can also identify with.
As cable brought in the allure of foreign trends, Singapore's free-to-air producers looked inwards and thought local.
45 degrees. West.
Local TV would tell Singaporean stories.
The big challenge was to create original content. We have to create something authentic, something that belongs to us. And we look into ourselves and we say, okay, this is who we are, this was our history, and this is where we come from. And the content must come from there and reflect that reality.
Ng Se-yong played a pivotal role driving the English drama unit. He struck gold with Growing Up.
You know how much is this plate? How much only? It's very cheap, what?
Set in the 60s to 80s, the weekly drama revolved around the Tay family.
I told you I don't like this brand of tea. How come you still buy?
Their daily struggles mirrored the ups and downs of many Singaporeans living through those decades.
Go and apologize. Go. Okay. Tonight, right? I'm late already. David. Tonight.
Pa? Is Ma okay?
She says she's not feeling very well this morning. I told her to go and see her sensei. I don't think I can go on without you.
But things were never the same when the Tay matriarch character got killed off. Something that Singaporean audiences didn't take in too easily.
Growing Up is a family drama, right? So as a family drama, it's a complete family with father, mother, 3 children, right? So that was, again, the baseline, right? With the mother gone, right? After a while, after a few episodes, we find that there is really a vacuum in the family. Whenever we tell each story, there's a lack of completeness. So we tried different ways of bringing like surrogate mothers or what into the mix, but it never quite worked the same way as when Soon Hui was there, the authentic mother. She is irreplaceable in that sense.
Growing Up's success came from the values it portrayed on screen, either directly or indirectly, values that were intrinsically Singaporean.
I think one important thing for script writers when they do write is to reflect the reality of the environment of society. So, yes, Singapore is a multiracial country. Yes, we speak different languages, and we value family very strongly. So, some of these themes are definitely reflected.
These journeys into the past gave Singaporeans in the 90s a clearer sense of their Singaporeanness, especially as the cultural influences of the West poured in.
Did you see his parents?
It became embracing a bit more of the westernized. In fact, I think we embraced it too much. Because when Masters of the Sea came out, everybody was like, what on earth is this, you know?
Crush him under your foot like you would a cockroach.
1994's Masters of the Sea, helmed by veteran American soap opera executives, did not resonate well with the viewers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My father died half an hour ago.
He was my father, too. If he was ill, why didn't you tell me?
There was no need.
The stories must come from us. The reality must come from us. From simple things like not wearing sweaters around the home, like not wearing slippers or shoes into the house. This is what we are from a practical point of view.
Hey, how come I never get pretty nurses like you to look after me?
Across its hits and misses, local TV concepts reflected an era of experimentation as shows took on influences and ideas from everywhere.
Patient, philosophical. Being sorry for yourself won't get
Just as experimental was the 90s art scene.
There was lots happening in the arts from the 60s onwards. Singaporean artists were working all the time and doing good things. But somehow it was never appreciated because, as I said, there was this sense of a cultural cringe. They were not some things that people did in a regular sort of way. You had to be slightly crazy to go into the arts.
Smile in my head, I saw us.
In the 90s, with the business of economic survival, infrastructure, and national security more or less on track, the government began paying more attention to the arts.
that you're so attractive to His Majesty. Throw away your temple keys, poor child.
I think they came to realize that man does not live by bread alone, that we need food for our soul.
It was a new frontier which meant that we could not rely on our muscles alone, but that the mind had to be engaged.
As the art scene began effervescing, new spaces were needed for creative expression. This is the substation. Once literally an electric substation, it now buzzed with a different kind of energy.
The substation in the 90s, I remember, it was like pretty much free-for-all space. And it also encouraged people to organize their own events and own gigs.
Alvin Wong played at the substation with upstart 90s surf punk band Force Vomit. The venue was where a new generation of local songwriters and musicians cut their teeth and exposed their brand of music to a wider audience.
There was a huge, they call it a DIY culture, do-it-yourself culture back then. And that was great for young creative people, for musicians, because that sort of became a trigger point. When people come, they get inspired, they start forming their own bands and stuff like that. It just starts a chain reaction because there was a space and a free space that encouraged open-mindedness in terms of creativity.
The substation in the 90s was a magnet. It drew people who were interested in artistic practice, which was not yet well established. The substation emphasized new work. The substation emphasized experimentalism. The substation gave a break to young artists. And the substation was prepared to do one thing which most established companies and agencies refused to do. The substation was prepared to take risks.
But the flip side to increased attention given to the arts was increased attention paid to the arts.
My first rehearsal involving contemporary dance, we had a police team come in to video the rehearsal because they wanted to see what we were rehearsing, if it broke any laws, if it was offensive. So they came into the rehearsal and said, they were going to video it. And so I got our guys to video the police team videoing us. So I said, if you can video us, then we can video you videoing us. So the substation became a place where you had to defend the art. You had to defend the practice.
There was freedom to create, but within the boundaries of what was deemed permissible for public consumption. OB markers indicated what was out of bounds, sort of.
OB markers came into existence in the 1990s, which is in some ways helpful, and in some ways they are quite sinister. In fact, it was described, the reason why we don't spell out the OB markers is to give the flexibility. But it is the same flexibility that also makes people very anxious because you don't know where the lines are drawn.
Many artists pushed the envelope, trying to figure out how far they could go. Until 1994, when one performance artist was deemed to have crossed the line.
I think the most controversial performance was probably this event that was held under this company called the Artists General Assembly. And there was one particular performance by the artist called Joseph Ng, a Singaporean artist. And it consisted of him, part of the performance consisted of him putting slabs of tofu on the floor and using red ink. And then he used a cane, a rotan, to smash the tofu. And then he went to the wall at the back, facing his back to the audience. He snipped off his pubic hair. And the government came down hard.
I think tensions between the artists and the establishment are eternal. They will never go away. And in fact, they shouldn't. Otherwise, we will all become establishment, which is a good thing in one way and a terribly bad thing in another.
As artists tried to express themselves freely in physical space, and the authorities watched for infringements to OB markers, a new technological advancement of the 90s would introduce Singaporeans to a wider, more open virtual space. The internet had landed. From accidental nation to economic miracle in just 3 decades. Singapore was a picture of progress in the 90s. And the wheels of a second industrial revolution were beginning to turn. The 90s heralded the beginnings of the information age.
If you could place the history of technological developments of mankind, the 90s will be the era that heralded the global information infrastructure that totally transformed the history of mankind in creating an environment where digital transformation has now reshaped the future of the world.
Singapore government is one of the most tech-savvy governments according to the surveys, and they actually adopt technology most readily and willingly. They do a great job in pushing these technologies because our survival depends on these technologies.
Today, it's impossible to imagine a world without the internet. Thousands of messages are sent across the island every second in a relentless blaze of communication. But this wasn't so 30 years ago.
This is Asha speaking. Can I help you?
I remember I was working at the Straits Times and I was sent to San Francisco for a conference. And it was a conference where the computer enthusiasts were coming together and displaying their goods. It's one of those electronic shows. But I was stunned by, the level of literacy that there was in San Francisco. And I said, I want my own email address. I want my email address on my card. And, people were wondering why I was going on about this, but I had seen what it was like.
Sasi finally got his email ID when the internet came to Singapore.
I guess the 90s, the biggest technological revolution has to be the internet. When the World Wide Web, the browser, was unleashed to the world, it really fired up the internet. For the first time, you could actually see images, video, audio. Of course, very slow. You still had to download it through some slow modem. But it was very exciting times. You felt a sense of connection with the rest of the world.
In the late 80s, the internet was restricted to a very small community, mainly researchers, scientists, and tertiary students. It was Tan Tin Wee who helped bring the internet to more people in Singapore.
So in 1994, early 1994, I was asked to run the operations of TechNet. So I said, how about take video information and transmit it through the internet? At that time, the World Wide Web could not be used as the interface for delivering video content. Why not we take the most exciting event that is ever broadcast in Singapore and let's deliver it to Singapore students in other countries. So we did manage to successfully pull it off. So that meant that Singapore probably became one of the first nations that broadcast our Independence Day video live over the nascent internet in 1994.
Have you come to this particular screen, all of you? You having any problem?
When the browser came around, that's when we really looked at it, and it was just amazing because all kinds of possibilities came to mind. For once, you had computing, connectivity, and content. And you can actually create content. It was mind-boggling. So that really opened our eyes to new possibilities.
Tin Wee's work on the internet in Singapore will go on to enable the creation of many internet-connected services. Unknown to him, it would even help singles find romance.
I actually randomly searched him on ICQ. We start chatting like normal friends whenever we meet on the internet.
She told me that she was conned by my pictures during that time. I was wearing my dark glass.
Yeah, big one.
So that's why she told me that there's a con man picture.
So I only see the below half.
Sue lived in Hong Kong and Amran in Singapore.
Until 1999, November, he went to Hong Kong. So finally we met in person. So we realized actually we like each other quite a lot. But of course, because it was the first time, we just have the feeling. But after that, we continue as a long-distance relationship. And we met in person maybe 2 to 3 times a year, either in Singapore or in Hong Kong. So we keep that relationship until we got married in 2002 July. Yeah.
Through the internet, people like Amran and Sue broadened their horizons. Their world became larger.
it brings the people who don't know each other to be closer to know each other. At the same time, brings people who you already knew closer. I think that was the purpose of the people want to get on the ICQ at that moment.
Finding love online may seem like a common thing now, but in the past, it was quite the taboo.
Maybe the stigma is still the same. Whether we can trust the other party just at the first time we meet and all that. I think the thing is still until now, that people will still have some reservation on this part.
I mean, we are the successful case. We know through, we knew each other through internet, and we got married and we have happy family. But doesn't mean that that's the only things that only case. Yeah, it could be a other way.
Human connections weren't the only thing the internet afforded. Its possibilities for business and commerce tantalized savvy entrepreneurs. E-commerce pioneer TK Wong was one of them. He founded Singapore's first internet startup, Silk Route Ventures.
I remember a businessman asked me, TK, is it legal? So I think people were still wondering, what's this all about? You know, it seemed like some side thing. People weren't very sure whether it's legal. So we said, why don't we set up a company to help companies come online, right? Kind of like how the old Silk Road, you know, created trade between East and West. We had this idea that maybe we could be the company to help bring on companies and create a new way of doing commerce. Today we call it e-commerce.
The dot-com boom of '95 saw the first wave of tech startups. Singapore was fiddling with the idea of online delivery, the precursor for present-day food delivery apps.
So we said, okay, let's go and scan the menu of Pizza Hut and put it in the graphical user interface. Create boxes for the guy to put in my fax number, my home number, or my telephone number. Fill that my address, and then click order. And then submit the order, route it through the fax gateway, and transmit it in a fax to the Pizza Hut and the pizza man delivery. Very much like the Deliveroo or the Food Panda and the Grab Food today.
But the e-commerce trend was not kind to every business. Some once thriving businesses started losing out to online competition. Elim Chu's 77th Street was one such casualty.
Hello, hello. Yeah, so this is where my first shop is. 180 square feet, one of the smallest shop that we have and we could afford during the time in the 80s. Yeah, so this is a shop and it's completely changed. They took over 77th Street and they've been here since then till today.
77th Street was a fashion haven for teens in the 90s. This was the place to come to for affordable streetwear.
I started out as a hairstylist in Far East Plaza and I used to wear a lot of stuff that I used to buy from UK, all the funky shoes, funky clothing that I have. And a lot of people were asking me where I got it from. So I said from London and they said, can I buy it off you? So I started selling my jacket, my bracelet and everything to them. In the 90s, where everything started picking up and we were kind of introducing streetwear fashion, accessories, everything into the market, and suddenly it started to pick up.
Being a one-stop source of the latest street fashion trends was 77th Street's unique selling point. The internet's worldwide reach would change that.
Yes, customer behavior changed because we used to tell them what is coming in, what is the trend. They will know more than us now because they can read it on internet as well. Well, same thing, we tried to sell everything on e-commerce and we put everything online. But I think with e-commerce, it's a different game. The thing is, the trend is on e-commerce, everything becomes cheaper. And that's where it affects us. Whether, you know, when we want to sell online, if we sell it cheaper, it will affect our retail. So then we have to make a judgment where, what do we do? So when we put it online was because we want to make it available for people around Asia to order from us. Yeah, but we know that if we want to move that trend into e-commerce, we will have to probably get out of the retail business.
As the internet made its way into the lives of Singaporeans and Singapore businesses, the country was riding the crest of a big wave of economic success. Until July 1997, when that wave came crashing down.
Asian financial crisis really took everybody by surprise because we never knew that the speed of Singapore being affected.
After just 3 decades of having been thrust into independence, Singapore had not only survived, it thrived. Affluence and aspirations soared.
There was the shift in Singapore from the 80s to the 90s, where we started to head towards being world-class, leaving the village, kampong, small city behind it from the 80s. So people had opportunities to pursue the 5 Cs, you know. A lot of opportunities. 90s, we had almost become first world, and now we wanted to be world-class.
The 5 Cs: cash, car, condominium, credit card, and country club membership became the focus of many upwardly mobile Singaporeans.
We were just going to make a living through the 5 Cs. Those were the aspirations of our time. I don't even think that you talk about the 5 Cs today, right? But during that time, those were the key frame of references of a materialistic success.
As Singaporeans pursued the good life, the country excelled in many areas: education, arts, tourism, and sports. It was one big party until the music suddenly stopped.
The Singapore economy showed another round of none-too-good figures. November's non-oil domestic exports experienced its sharpest decline since February last year.
It was 1997, and the unsympathetic party pooper was the Asian financial crisis, the AFC.
The banking industry, in fact, is a stable industry. During the 90s, it was the backbone of the Singapore economy. If the bank fails, the whole economy suffers. Did not see it coming. It came overnight. When the AFC came in, the first impact was on the bank. And the bank was, like I said, they are badly hit.
Joe Chu was a 25-year-old quality control technician and one of many who felt the effects of the AFC. Joe was retrenched, along with 28,000 other Singaporeans, the highest ever recorded since the last economic recession.
Incoming goods will be getting less, production getting low, output will be lesser, and then the delivery will be also lesser.
A pall had been cast over Singapore's 90s party.
My parents is actually nagging me every day. Why do you never find a job? How come you so long never work? I feel like I'm so useless.
Our first response was, what will these people do if they do not have additional training other than their expertise within the banking industry? Will they be able to comfortably merge into other industry with their current experience in the bank? Will it be relevant? Through brainstorming, we find that this training package will be an additional comfort for them that if they need to go for courses to assimilate themselves into other industry, then it will be very useful for them to lighten their financial burden.
Retraining gave Joe Chu a new career.
Because if you are retraining, you'll learn all the new skills and then all the new technologies coming up. Also, when an employer, you know that you have going through this course, your chance of possibly employment will be very high.
And then you click the connect button. Something called a float button.
To me, I learned one thing is that don't give up yourself and then try to learn as much thing as possible to keep yourself updated.
The Asian financial crisis brought many valuable lessons for Singapore.
I think Singapore has become more resilient. Workers do not rest on their laurels thinking that, oh, if I'm in a job, it is an iron bowl. No, I need not have to go for further training because skills get absolute within a short period of time. Probably 5 years, 6 years, if you don't continue to upgrade, then put yourself out of the market.
But even as Singapore pulled itself out of the '97 financial crisis, there was another storm brewing on the horizon. An MIT programmer sounded an alert that a potential glitch on computer systems threatened to bring the whole connected infrastructure grinding to a halt.
Suddenly, everybody woke up and realized, oh my gosh, what if the computer read it as 1900 instead of 2000, right? Because you only use the last 2 zeros. So in the final 2 to 3 years, everybody began in earnest to go through their systems, worried that planes would crash, hospitals would stop working, banks would file up.
The fear was that anyone, any company, any government department that relied on computers would simply stop working at the very moment when December 31st, 1999 becomes January 1st, 2000. This was the dreaded Y2K bug.
I remember like 3 years before we hit 2000, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be 27 or something, I don't know what. And I was like, I should have a baby by then. I should be, have my own house by then and all that. And hopefully Y2K won't wipe out everything.
As January 1st, 2000 approached, anxiety spread.
This built up a tremendous fear in the community. Very much like fake news generating fear today. That was probably the first mass internet fear that penetrated the entire computing community back then.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The moment of truth arrived at the stroke of midnight on January the 1st, 2000.
Huge sigh of relief. Nothing. It's amazing. I don't know how we survived it, but I guess all the hard work, the preparation, there was no major calamity, so we were fortunate to survive that scare.
There's no doubt the 1990s was one big roller coaster ride for Singapore. We went through many highs, lows, and even had our fair share of panic attacks. Nonetheless, we came out stronger, looking ever forward to what the future might hold for us all.
Every decade I do miss, but on the other hand, I can't afford to wish that we should remain in the 90s. Absolutely not. And I can tell you one thing, we have far brighter, greater, more wonderful things awaiting us.
The 90s in Singapore, to me, just meant a
coming of age for Singapore. Singapore opening its doors to the rest of the world and letting it in, and in turn also giving Singapore to the rest of the world, which it has done very successfully.
But I think most importantly, the 90s is about where, as a nation, we grew up.
Looking back at it, the 90s may seem like a decade that feels just like yesterday, but like ancient history all at the same time. At the dawn of a new millennium, the noughties, or 2000s, would usher in a bold new era for Singapore. One that would test the strength and resolve of Singaporeans.